Welcome to Knightline Extra on the award-winning Knightline Sports Network.
All right, greetings, faithful Knight fans. Welcome to Knightline Extra. This is not Andrew Phegley. I've hijacked Knightline Extra from Andrew Phegley. Please do not tell him. It's Adam from the Sons of UCF show. You can catch me and my co-host UCF Mike every Wednesday here on the Knightline Sports Network. And I'm going to take you through this week's Knightline Extra. Excited to have Hank Waddles from GoMightyCard.com on. Hank is a Stanford insider. We'll give you some insight on the Stanford offense. I got a couple of key injuries on the old line that you might want to hear about. Gives you a really good breakdown of USC. And so USC plays a pretty similar offensive style under their new offensive coordinator. So he's got some insight on what happened and what went wrong after USC won 45-20, and some things that you might want to hear about thinking about the game this Saturday. So stay tuned. Hank gives some really good insight. Before we get there, a couple of news and notes items here. So again, 3:30 kickoff in the bounce house. It's going to be hot. It could be rainy, so prepare accordingly out there. The quarterback situation still hasn't really been resolved, so I'm talking to you all midweek. And what we know at this point is sounds like Brandon Wimbush has been taking a few reps, and there was some commentary from Jeff Lebby this week that he could see some time, that he's working kind of his way back. All indications right now are probably Dylan Gabriel would continue to get the first snap, as he called it. But DJ Mack has been cleared to play and has been cleared to practice. So we'll see what that means. Heupel alluded to him doing some drills on the side and staying in some kind of shape, but obviously not in football shape. So the quarterback carousel continues to turn as we welcome in Stanford to the bounce house on Saturday. So should be a good one. Obviously, I think we know what to expect from our team, but listen in to Hank here, give you some insight on what to expect from the Cardinal this week.
Hey, this is Travis Dever, Kai's Real Estate, the Dever team, New Smyrna Beach. Your source for real estate and everything else, New Smyrna Beach. Proud sponsor of Knightline and Knightline Postgame Live. Call me anytime at 386-690-1636. That's 386-690-1636. Let me show you my hometown, New Smyrna Beach, UCF's favorite beach. Go Knights and charge on.
5 questions with an insider, getting to know this week's opponent.
All right, with the Stanford Cardinal coming to town this week, it's an opponent we're not as familiar with. So I'm pleased to be joined by Hank. He is he's the man behind GoMightyCard.com, a diehard sports site for Stanford Cardinal fans. And Hank joins us now to share with us all about the Stanford Cardinal. Hank, how are you?
I'm doing real good. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you. And so real curious to learn more about Stanford. And I guess probably the top question that I'd have for you is the status of KJ Costello. So the starting quarterback took a pretty vicious hit against Northwestern, did not play against USC, but sounds like David Shaw and the staff are preparing for him to play this week against UCF. So kind of a two-parter. A, any updates on kind of his status, and B, what do you expect to get from him in terms of health percentage? Is he still in protocol? Do we expect him to be at full strength?
It's interesting. There was, Stanford is notoriously tight-lipped about player injuries, which I think is probably a good thing. It frustrates fans, but so there wasn't much. We didn't get much information about Costello's injury. We all saw what happened. We saw the hit that he took, but then there were rumors that he had been cleared medically. There were a couple of reports that I saw on Twitter on midweek last week saying that he was going to play, and then on Thursday we heard that wasn't correct. David Shaw did say something about it not having been a concussion. And when he was hurt, and this is my extremely non-medical opinion based on watching him on TV. When he was sitting there on the turf and as he walked off, it didn't look like we're used to seeing with guys who get concussions. Just based on how he was responding, based on how the medical staff was with him, it didn't really look like concussion protocol to me. And so at any rate, he's definitely going to be playing on Saturday, and I don't expect that he's going to be limited in any kind of way, based on what happened last weekend or 2 weekends ago.
So give us a little scouting report. Obviously, he's kind of some people list him as a dark horse Heisman candidate. I think obviously he had some notoriety coming into the season. What kind of player is he? What can we expect from him if he is on the field at full strength on Saturday?
He's a pocket quarterback. He can run a little bit. He's not gonna remind anybody of Cam Newton or anything like that. But there might be typically it seems like what the offense does as these quarterbacks get. We saw this with Andrew Luck. We saw this with Kevin Hogan. As these quarterbacks get a little bit more experienced, they tend to run a lot less as far as like designed run plays. And so you might see a couple read options with Costello, but he's almost never going to keep it. He's a pocket passer, and he's a lot of times described as kind of a gunslinger in the sense that he's going to take some chances with the ball. He's got a strong arm. He talked a lot, at media day about being a lot more, comfortable in the offense, and you could really see him grow an awful lot over the course of last season. And he benefited, I think, for the first time in the David Shaw era, the running game kind of disappeared last year. And so suddenly, about 4 or 5 games into the season, the Stanford offense became heavily tilted towards the pass. And so Costello had, really one of the more prolific seasons in Stanford history. And so I think he benefited by that. That's, you said that his name is on some of these Heisman lists, which is, kind of a stretch, but there were people who were saying that he was going to be the best quarterback in the Pac-12 this year. So it was disappointing not to have him last week, but it's good. It'll be good to see him out there again on Saturday.
A couple other big injuries that Stanford has on the offensive side of the ball. So Walker Little, offensive tackle, he's going to be out. And it looks like Dylan Powell, who plays left guard, is also doubtful. If both those two guys don't play, which again sounds like isn't expected, how big of a loss is that for Stanford, and how do you think that impacts their game plan?
I'm not sure how it's going to impact the game plan, but that's the biggest concern right now. The offensive line is a patchwork, and Walker Little was on pretty much every preseason All-America list, and he's out for the season now, and at left tackle. And if you look at the depth chart now, if you look at left tackle, the starter is a true freshman, and the 2 backups are true freshmen. If you look across the line, every backup right now is a freshman, and in the last 12, 13 years of paying close attention to Stanford football as they've kind of been resurgent, I can never remember anything like that as far as the lack of depth right now on the offensive line. These are guys who, the left tackle, Walter Rouse, is a guy, he was a 4-star recruit, and there are real high expectations for him, but no one expected him to be playing this year. And but there he is, starting left tackle. So there are concerns for sure. One of the things that you might see, we saw a little bit of this last week, is to try to take some pressure off of these guys and try to alleviate the pass rush. More quick screens than we typically see from the Stanford offense. So that might be one way the game plan changes. I don't know that I don't know that we're going to see Costello sitting back in the pocket as much as he typically does, because I don't know that pocket's going to exist. We'll have to see.
Let's talk about skill players for a second. So names that a lot of college football fans would know from Stanford years past. So Bryce Love and J.J. Arcega-Whiteside have both left, have graduated, they're gone. So who are the names that we should look out for from a skill position standpoint on offense that they're going to make an impact for Stanford?
The tailback is Cameron Scarlett, and it's interesting is David Shaw was talking about this in his press conference, the fact that Cam Scarlett's a fifth-year senior, so he was on campus for he was the backup to Christian McCaffrey for 2 years, and then Bryce Love for 2 years after that. So he's finally has his opportunity, and he's not, he's certainly not in the same league as those two guys, arguably the two greatest running backs in Stanford history. But he's good at what he does, and he'll probably get 15 to 20 carries on Saturday. Wide receivers are talented but young. Connor Weddington is probably the biggest playmaker to look for. He's a junior. He kind of had some injuries last year, but he's a converted running back, and so they do a lot of things, just trying to get him the ball in space. And Michael Wilson's on the other side. Colby Parkinson, though, is at tight end. And at Stanford, the tight ends are kind of like skill players. And he's a big target, 6'7", especially when Costello is playing. He looks to Parkinson an awful lot. So that'll be a matchup to look for on offense is Costello to Colby Parkinson.
Let's talk a little bit about their season so far. So win against Northwestern 17-7, and then they travel to USC, and I think this score surprised some people nationally. Again, admittedly, I don't know that our group follows Stanford as well, but I think this score surprised some folks nationally. USC won 45-20. From your perspective, what have you seen so far in the team that that sort of helped to put that 45-20 score on the board? Again, it's kind of un-Stanford like if you think about them nationally. What did you see, or what took place from your estimation in that USC game?
It was a really strange game. Well, to be honest, it did remind me some of 2 years ago, the last time Stanford played at USC. But if all you saw was the score, it's. The game was really strange because Stanford was actually up 17-3 before being outscored 42-3 the rest of the way. And so when it was 17-3, things were looking really good. And Stanford scored on the first two possessions, touchdowns on the first two possessions, and then a field goal, and then actually another field goal. So they scored on the first four possessions, and it was 20-7, or sorry, 20-10. But they were things were looking good. The offense looked good, and then even into the third quarter, it was 24-20 USC. It was my point. It was close until about 3 minutes left in the third quarter, and then USC rattled off touchdowns on 3 consecutive possessions, and it just got ugly really, really fast. And if you put the game on in the fourth quarter, it was, the difference between the two teams was wide. I mean, USC looked like a team that was headed for the playoffs. Their true freshman quarterback, Keaton Slovis, looked like a Heisman candidate, and Stanford looked tired and in disarray. And so it was concerning, but I mean, I tend to be maybe more optimistic than I should. And when I was there at the game, and I feel like if a couple things had gone a little bit differently, Stanford missed 2 field goals on their first 2 possessions of the second half, and if they had made those 2 field goals, they have a lead midway through the third quarter. And who knows what happens from there, but it just really got away from them.
Yeah, I watched the game on the broadcast, and one of the things that was said a few times on the broadcast is that it just seemed like you kind of mentioned this, but it seemed like USC kind of wore them down. Stanford got tired. Do you think that's an accurate statement based on what you saw?
Yeah, I do. I think that there was, one of the concerns that obviously bleeds into this week is, USC has they're in the early stages of adapting to a new offense. They've got this air raid offense. Graham Harrell has come in, their offensive coordinator, and so they're not as fast as Central Florida, but it's a fast-paced offense. They're sending a lot of receivers out into the pattern, and they really challenged the Stanford defensive backs, and so they weren't able to get any pressure on the quarterback. And as the game went on, it became more difficult to get that pressure because they were sometimes you think about a defense getting worn down. Stanford, that's how Stanford used to play. They would wear down a defense by pounding them with the run, whereas USC wore them down because it's more difficult to sub because they're because the plays are coming so rapid fire, and you and your listeners know all about that. But that's kind of what it looked like in the fourth quarter. I was sitting right behind the Stanford bench, and just there was no energy from the players on the sideline. There was no energy from the players who were playing, and not because they had given up, but because they just were spent. I mean, that's just really what it felt like.
Well, yeah, it was an interesting test because if you think about the coaching tree, so Graham Harrell came from Texas Tech, where Mike Leach was the coach when he was the quarterback. Mike Leach was at Oklahoma when Josh Heupel was the quarterback, who's now the coach of UCF. Right. So you can kind of see the connections between the offensive systems. So I think a lot of UCF fans were watching that game and kind of saw that fourth quarter and saw the speed differential between the two teams and said, okay, we feel pretty good about our position coming up here this weekend. But let's add a few factors. And so I think this is Stanford's first trip to Florida. I think it was 2010. They were there for the Orange Bowl. So they haven't been this far east, correct, at least in almost a decade now. It'll be a 3:30 kick here, Orlando time, blistering hot. It's about 86, 87, pretty humid out there. Do you think those things factor in at all? And if so, is Stanford doing anything now to try to adjust for that as they try to prepare for the game?
You know what? In the weekly press conference, one of the players was talking about that the players were all directed to drink lots of water and get lots of sleep, throughout the week. And classes are not in session at Stanford yet, so they could be doing nothing but football and practice, meetings, drinking water, and sleeping is probably all that they're doing this week. And I think that Stanford does. It's not like Alabama that never leaves, that never leaves their time zone. Stanford does go back. They go back to Notre Dame every other year. They go back to Northwestern. So they do travel. But this is obviously the biggest trip that they've taken in quite some time. And it's obviously not the same as a bowl game where you've got, maybe you go down a week early, right? So there, I think it is a factor. The weather will be a factor. It was hot down here for the USC game, but it was a 7:30 game, which is not what we're talking about. So I think that will be a factor for sure. But I think my guess is that the UCF offense will be more of a factor than the sun and the humidity.
Yeah, it's kind of our secret potion, right? So you kind of add all those things together to get a sort of a stew of circumstances, right? We've got the team running going fast. It's hot outside. The humidity in Florida obviously is I live in California now. It's hot out here. Don't get me wrong, but it's humid in Florida.
It's not the same.
You wear it like a shirt down there. And so it was
40. We had humidity 45% last week, and everybody was dying.
Yeah. Right. How about I know it's a tough trip, but it's an interesting location. Any indication on sort of the visiting fans? Any groups or anything that you're aware of where folks are coming out to visit from Stanford?
I don't know. I know that there are alumni groups all around. I'm sure that there will be some fans there, but I don't think it's gonna. If you look, you'll maybe see in a corner of the stadium there'll be some Stanford fans probably.
Sure.
But I wouldn't think there's going to be a ton of people. I know that a lot of the players' parents travel to all the games. There'll be people there, but it won't be a ton.
So
That's for sure.
how big a game is this for Stanford? In the sense of, one of the things admittedly about UCF is we have a bit of an inferiority complex. We've been kind of left out of the playoffs the last couple seasons. We've been fighting for relevance. We've been, proving on the field as many people tell us to do. And Stanford's a big name for us, right? It's a big Pac-12 conference opponent. We've actually never beaten a Pac-12 opponent in our history. So this is it's a big one for us. How about from Stanford's standpoint? How big a game is it for them? How much are they? I guess were they aware of the UCF game, and is that a game that they sort of circled? Do you think on their schedule as they planned out their season?
I think that there's a couple things. I think it's what it kind of points out is there's so much talk right now about how teams put together their non-conference schedule, right? And especially out here because the Pac-12 plays a full 9-game conference schedule where there are a lot of teams that are playing 8. And so feels like in the last few years, there's more attention paid to who teams are playing out of conference. And, this game, I'm sure when this game was put together, 6 years ago, maybe, when this game, when this deal was signed for this home and home, it was probably done because, hey, we can play this team from Florida. It gives the coaches a trip to Florida down into the South for recruiting. And Coach Shaw talked about that this week, that the coaches are going to be fanning out throughout the Southeast on Friday night, going to high school football games. And it looks good. It looks, 5-6 years ago, it looks good. And then suddenly UCF turns into this powerhouse. And because, when we played was 2015, right? 2015.
Yep.
And that was like you said, that was a completely different team. I was looking back at the preview that I wrote for that game and it was a completely different situation. And the turnaround has been so dramatic, that now it's, if you look at, there's a lot of concern about this game because, Stanford opens with Northwestern, who, played in their conference championship game. And then, USC and now, UCF, who conference champion and consistent power. And then next week at Oregon home for Oregon. And so it's a really tough opening gauntlet. But my thoughts are, well, first of all, I was really hoping that the winning streak would still be going. The Central Florida winning streak would still be going. That would have been pretty fun.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is that this is, I hate to say this out loud, but this game doesn't really matter for Stanford. And in the sense that I think it only matters if they are contending for a national championship, which they clearly aren't. And, they need to win games. And I don't want to say I don't care if they win, but if they can beat Oregon next week, that's so much more important than beating Central Florida on Saturday. Like that Oregon game, if we can beat Oregon, then we can maybe get to then we can be thinking about the conference championship game and thinking about the Rose Bowl and things like that. But the importance of Saturday's game is that we have to play better than at USC. So I don't know. That's kind of a roundabout way to answer your question, but I hope that we can deal with the Central Florida speed. And David Shaw was asked about the quarterback situation at Central Florida, and he said, "Look, the quarterback doesn't matter. Whoever's playing quarterback is going to be playing fast. We have to prepare for the scheme, and I think that we have to see signs that they can play against that type of scheme. Oregon plays fast. It's a completely different offense, but Oregon plays fast also, and so that's what we need to see from Saturday."
Do you think there's any chance that Stanford is overlooking UCF, thinking about Stanford as you kind of laid that theory out there?
I don't think so. I think that fans tend to do things like that, and I really believe that everything I've ever seen and heard from Coach Shaw, from the players, emanating from that program, is that it's, they never look past what's coming on Saturday, and and I think that I don't know. I don't know that. I mean, I'm sure there's, it's natural sometimes for athletes at this level to, maybe let's imagine that Scott Frost had never come to Central Florida, right? And it's still what it was 5 years ago. Then you could say, well, maybe they're just going to go out here and they could look past them. But I don't think there's anybody in the country who wants to play Central Florida. There's nobody in the country who's looking past Central Florida. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that they're a brand, and if you look at, we've got a non-conference Northwestern, Notre Dame, and Central Florida. If there's one to look past, it's Northwestern. Like Central Florida is, I think, in that same conversation with these elite programs in the country right now. So my point in saying that the game doesn't matter is more like, as far as what the team goals are, they are not going to go to the college football playoffs. I mean, I don't know if they run the table from here, then I guess they are, but that's not where this team is headed.
Yeah, just a couple of points for order. So the series was signed between Stanford and UCF in September 14. UCF is coming off a 12-1 season where we won the Fiesta Bowl, and that 2014 season ended up 9-4. So we were certainly at least on the favorable swing. Obviously, the 2015 season when the game was played was the winless year, Scott Frost's first year, and then obviously the last 2 years have been much better than that. And then from a streak standpoint, so we do still have two streaks that are going here. We have 16 straight wins at home, and we now have 28 straight games where we've scored 30 points or more. So a couple of streaks, at least that could be on the line when Stanford comes to town on Saturday. So I hate doing prediction radio. I hate doing that kind of stuff. So I'm not going to ask you to give me a prediction, but I will ask you two questions. So the first question, if Stanford is going to win this game, they need to do what?
They need to control the ball, obviously, and that's what that's always going to be true for Stanford football. And if there was a moment in the USC game when things started looking better, Stanford took the opening kickoff of the second half and held it for more than 7 minutes, and then they missed a short field goal. And that's what Stanford has to do. If they can get first downs, and they can control time of possession, and not turn the ball over, then that's the only. If this is a shootout, that's not playing into Stanford's hands. So that's what they need.
And then the converse of that, if UCF is going to beat Stanford, they will need to do what?
I think if the biggest concern watching the Stanford defense on last Saturday was a concern kind of heading into the season, was how the linebackers and safeties were going to cover balls over the middle, and so I think that's if UCF is able to get rolling in that respect, where they're consistently completing passes and there's yards after catch, because the Stanford defense has always been predicated on allowing teams to, with the idea of forcing teams to make lots of plays to move down the field and keeping the ball in front of them. That's what the Stanford defense has been built on, even when they were at their best. So if you see receivers getting loose in the secondary, that's a bad sign for anybody, but it's an especially bad sign for Stanford.
All right, be sure to go follow Hank on Twitter. You can find him at GoMightyCard. You can also go to GoMightyCard.com. Hank, we appreciate you for joining. Thanks for the insight on Stanford, and we look forward to a good one on Saturday.
Thanks, I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to it too.
Oviedo Brewing Company is the hottest microbrewery in Central Florida. Located 7 miles from UCF at the Oviedo Mall, this 8,800 square foot brewery just opened its doors 6 months ago and has already crafted 13 unique beer flavors and counting in their tap room. The tap room contains different styles of beverages, including ciders, wines, and craft sodas. Not only do they have amazing beers, they also have a full kitchen with gourmet pizzas, wings, and tacos. Oviedo Brewing has activities for each day of the week, such as Taco Tuesdays, Trivia Wednesdays, Pizza and Pint on Thursdays, plus live music on Fridays Friday and Saturday evening, but the best is Sunday brunch with unlimited beer mimosas. Need a spot for game day? Oviedo Brewing is just the place with their large TVs to catch all the live games. You also find Oviedo Brewing at UCF tailgating sampling beers. And OBC support for the Knights doesn't stop there. If you need a spot for UCF away games, come to Oviedo Brewing Company, where the Knightline sports crew will be broadcasting live after the game. You can get all the details on their Instagram or Facebook page. Follow them at Oviedo Brewing CO. Download the Untapped app, and you can find out what beers are on tap. The food menu is also available on their website, OviedoBrewingCO.com.
All right, again, appreciate Hank Waddles from GoMightyCard.com joining us, giving us an insider view of the Stanford Cardinal program. Now for a less professional view of Stanford. If you listen to the Sons of UCF show each week, you know UCF Mike and I have been doing 5 things you need to know about our opponent. This week, obviously, Stanford, Mike and I have 5 interesting things that we shared on our show this week, but I'm going to rerun that for you all right now in case you haven't heard the episode yet, or maybe you haven't followed us, and if you haven't, now's as good a time as any to do that. So this is UCF Mike and I from our show this week, 5 things you need to know about Stanford.
Spice up your company with homemade marketing services from Tasty Gravy Creative. Tasty Gravy serves up a menu of budget-friendly marketing, graphic design, and public relations services customized to your specific goals. Co-owned by a UCF graduate, Tasty Gravy can help refresh your brand, strengthen your online presence, or reinforce your company's message. Contact Tasty Gravy for help with your website, social media, marketing, advertising materials, and more. Visit tastygravy.com.
All right, Mike, Stanford coming to the Bounce House. We've only played them one time, and so we might not know a lot about them. They're out here on the left coast near me, actually. So, and so we've done some research for you. We've come up with 5 things you need to know about Stanford heading into the game this week, Mike. So I'll kick off with the first one. So number 1, Stanford had 2 relatively big names on the offense last year that both have left. Running back Bryce Love, who was a perennial Heisman candidate, and wide receiver J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, who is now playing for the Philadelphia Eagles. Big shoes to fill for both those guys. At running back, Cameron Scarlett is the replacement. He hasn't cracked over 100 yards in either game this year, so not as potent as Bryce Love. He seemed to put up 100 yards kind of at a blink of an eye. Cameron Scarlett has not yet eclipsed 100 in a game. Obviously, our run defense has been pretty stout, so that'll be an interesting matchup to see if we can keep him contained. On the receiving end, tight end Colby Parkinson is the leading receiver with 12 catches, 136 yards, and a touchdown. And so he seems to be the favorite target of whoever is going to play quarterback. More on that in a second. So these are probably the 2 big names you need to know from an offensive standpoint, the guys who will get the ball a lot. I had a chance to watch a good portion of that USC-Stanford game, and they targeted Parkinson a lot. So it'll be curious to see what that looks like here coming up this week in Orlando. But 2 names to think about: Scarlett and Parkinson. Mike, what do you know about Stanford?
Well, Parkinson, I looked him up. He's a big guy, 6'7", and we used to get to practice against that a lot now with Hescock. So something at least our defense will be familiar with. But he seems to be their best target, and our run defense has been great so far. So we'll see what's going to happen. Obviously, this guy Scarlett hasn't been great. I mean, he's been okay, but he hasn't been Bryce Love. So I think I'll get to my predictions later. But
fair enough.
I'm not that scared of these guys.
What fact do you have about Stanford, Mike?
Fact number 2. Well, their quarterback KJ Costello did not play against USC after he got hit in the head in week 1. He's scheduled to play against UCF. Is that what they're saying?
Yeah.
Do we even know yet?
David Shaw came out and said that that right now the plan is all signs he will play against UCF.
Does he have to pass some concussion protocol or anything? He already passed that?
I mean, this could be another Heupel subterfuge. I don't think he didn't really specify all that. He just essentially said, hey, we're going with this other kid to play against USC, and we expect KJ Costello will be back and ready for UCF. So maybe something changes during the week. Maybe he doesn't pass those tests. So it certainly could be up in the air, I suppose.
Well, if Costello does play, he is a good quarterback. He's a top prospect. It's going to make a huge difference whether he plays or not. So I believe he's one of the top guys going into the draft this year, right?
Yeah, he had a pretty legit year last year, and he was
for 3,500 yards, 29 touchdowns.
Yeah, I think he was mentioned on some Heisman watch lists at some point. So yeah, he certainly will be a difference maker if he's in there. The kid who played, I think it was David Mills was his name.
Davis Mills.
Davis Mills. He wasn't horrible, but he certainly wasn't didn't look as comfortable as maybe a senior like Costello would.
He was 22 for 36, 237 yards, a touchdown and an interception. So nothing really jumps out at you. I didn't get to watch the game, so I couldn't tell you how he looked.
Yeah, he looked all right. On the defensive end, so fact number 3, they have a defensive back cornerback named Paulson Adekunle, I guess I'm gonna pronounce his name. I probably have that wrong, but this kid seems like a legit cover corner. He had 20 pass breakups last year. He's 6'1", so he's a bigger corner, which means he probably could match up with Gabe Davis from a size perspective. But he's definitely a name that NFL scouts are looking at. He seems like a pretty legit cover corner. However, I would throw this in there. At the game against USC, the team gave up over 350 passing yards. USC is got a new offensive coordinator this year, Graham Harrell. Graham Harrell played at Texas Tech, Mike, for a coach that you know of named Mike Leach. Mike Leach, the former offensive coordinator of Oklahoma, where one quarterback was Josh Heupel. So it's not too hard to connect the dots between the offensive systems that USC runs and the system that we run. I'm sure there are tweaks, of course. So it makes you wonder, is that secondary vulnerable to our kind of attack? We just saw what USC did against them. So despite the fact that Adebo is a legit corner, are they able to keep up with our scheme? Are they able to keep up with our speed? And do we have an advantage from that standpoint based on what USC just showed us? I guess we'll find out this Saturday.
Well, this guy's going to be the best corner we faced so far this year, even though that's not really saying much.
That's fair.
But will he be a formidable opponent for Gabe Davis? We'll see, because I don't know if there's anybody that can stop Gabe Davis.
Yep.
Or at least maybe he can try to slow him down. It's going to be a big opportunity now for the other guys. Trey Nixon, Harris, Otis, and AK coming out of the backfield. Marlon, where was Marlon Williams last week? I don't think he got any passes thrown to him. So a lot of nice plays underneath. Have Davis go deep, take that guy out of the picture, and then open it up for the guys underneath.
Yeah, one thing I was so if you were listening to the game, if you watched the game, which you didn't, but the commentators were talking about how it looked like Stanford just got worn down by the speed of USC in the second half. And while USC certainly has athletes, I'm sure, I feel pretty comfortable that we have some of the fastest players in the country on our field at any given time. So be curious if they can keep up with USC speed. How are they going to feel about our speed? Particularly when you consider the fourth fact, Mike, that you found or that you want to talk about. So what's the fourth thing you know about Stanford?
Well, they play in the Pac-12, and this is only our third game ever against a Pac-12 team. Is that right?
That is correct.
So we played Arizona State in 2002, and we played Stanford in 2015. And also, this is the furthest east that Stanford's had to travel in the last 10 years. Obviously, they don't come out this way very often. They played in the Orange Bowl in 2010, which is a game they won 40-12 over Virginia Tech. I just don't think these guys are going to be ready for the speed that we have, the Florida speed, and the heat that they're going to be experiencing at 3:30 on a Saturday afternoon in Orlando. It's going to be scorching, and they're not going to know what hit them. You just said it, how USC wore them down with their speed by the end of that game. That was out in California. USC outscored them in the second half 21-0. I think we may do something similar, if not worse, to them in the second half of this game.
For sure. Yeah, it's interesting. We obviously we're 0-2 against the Pac-12, right? So we have opportunity to get one on the board. Both the games came on the road. So this is the first Pac-12 team or Pac-10, whatever variety they were of that time, that it will be in Orlando. And so it's obviously not an opponent we see a ton of. You wonder how the time change will affect him. It's a 12:30 kick for the body clocks of Stanford. You wonder how that throws up the rhythm. Are they coming out a day earlier than they normally would? You kind of wonder what that does. On Saturday in Orlando, it's looking like 88, Mike, is the high right now, if I'm looking at the weather correctly. It shows thunderstorms, actually. That's a problem. So it'll be curious to see what happens, how they travel, if they're prepared. David Shaw's team historically are usually pretty prepared, pretty disciplined teams. That's typically what Stanford's known for. So we have a chance to get a Pac-12 victim on our win sheet. So fact number 5.
Hold on, we've beaten SEC teams. We've beaten ACC teams.
Yep.
We've beaten Big 12 teams.
Baylor. We beat Baylor.
Yes, right, Baylor. Okay. Big 10, yes. Maryland. So This is it. This is the last conference we have to conquer.
This is it. This is our last one. We can get them all off the board. All right, so fact number 5, Mike. I was curious about this myself. Stanford has a mascot, which is a tree, which is interesting because their nickname is the Cardinal. Not the Cardinals, they're the Cardinal. So what the hell and why is there a tree? So I researched this, Mike. It was created in 1975 for the band, but it's been a fixture ever since. However, Mike, the tree, not without controversy. I know you've had your fair share of run-ins with mascots, but the tree, check this out. In 1995, the tree got in a fight with the Cal mascot and forcibly removed the mascot's headgear, which apparently is a big no-no. Cal's mascot never reveals who it is. And so the tree helmeted it, I guess, kind of pulled a Matthew McConaughey to Lee Corso's headgear this week and tore the mask off. Now, Stanford and Cal are rivals, so I guess that makes some sense. In 96, the tree was attacked and damaged at a basketball game by some fans. In 98, the costume was stolen and held hostage for 2 weeks, and eventually was returned after a ransom by some students at Arizona State. In 2006, the student wearing the costume was suspended after she was seen drinking from a flask during a basketball game. And later in 2006, the tree got in an altercation with some officials at the NCAA women's basketball tournament and was banned for the 2007 tournament. So, Mike, I know you recently had a run-in with Alzy. Do I need to keep you, or is there a restraining order that keeps you away from the Stanford tree? Because I'm worried about what might happen to it.
Yeah, this tree might not put up with my shenanigans. Seems a little feisty. But that's a lot of incidents.
Who knew? Yeah. Well, you think about it, right? It's like the dumbest mascot ever. So I could see where, like, if you're walking around and you see just a tree walking around, I could see some drunk frat guys just trying to punch it in the face or knock it down. I did not see the drinking in the tree coming. I'm not mad at it, by the way. I just didn't see that one coming. It was held hostage for a period of time. It's like an old 90210 plot where they hold the condor hostage or whatever. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's not without controversy. I don't know if the tree travels, though, so I'll be curious to see if the tree actually makes it out to Orlando. I don't know if they bring the band for this kind of game. It's a pretty lengthy flight. So I guess we'll have to find out. We'll all find out together if the tree gets there, and if so, what happens next.
Well, before this show, I went back and watched the play when the band is on the field with Cal and Stanford. And have you seen what the tree looked like back in 1982?
I did. I have seen that.
It's pretty funny. If anybody hasn't seen the evolution of what this tree mascot looks like, we should go back and take a peek.
Every time I watch
that, why he gets hazed quite a bit.
Every time I watch that Cal Stanford video, that poor kid at the end takes that whatever that instrument is right to the face. I always wonder if that kid ended up being okay.
No, actually, I saw a video where they were interviewing that person, the trombone player that got knocked over, and the guy that knocked him over.
Is the trombone kid all right? Because he looked like he took a pretty big hit on that one.
No, yeah, he's okay now.
All right.
I mean, it's been 30 years, 40 years almost.
Well, you never know. You never know what'll happen, Mike. All right. So that's 5 things you need to know about Stanford. We've been pretty money on these 5 things each week, Mike. We've had a couple things that we've told you about come true. So none of these are probably options, I guess, that you can, the running backs, or if a tree gets in a fight, you can always tell your friends, I heard that first on the Sons of UCF.
You've heard us talk about the great food at our good friend Kyle Israel's restaurant, The Little Greek Fresh Grill. The Little Greek now has franchises available. Please call 407-697-2272. That's 407-697-2272 to see what The Little Greek can do for you. Also check out The Little Greek's newest location at 3131 Daniels Road, Suite 104, Winter Garden, Florida. The Little Greek Fresh Grill. Fresh, flavorful, fabulous.
All right, that's going to bring an end to this edition of Knightline Extra Stanford Week Preview Edition. Again, big thanks to Hank Waddles for joining me and UCF Mike for stepping in as well and letting us use the 5 things you need to know about UCF. Again, 3:30 Saturday. Be in the bounce house. Be in front of your TV. This is going to be a fun game. I think it's an interesting stylistic game. Stanford obviously wants to pound the ball. We want to throw the ball. And so we'll see who wins out. But as always, everybody here at the Knightline Sports Network appreciates everyone out there at Knight Nation for supporting us, listening. Again, you can follow us at Sons of UCF. You can follow us at the Knightline Sports Network. Make sure you subscribe to shows, and you'll get all the shows when they drop in their feeds. So from all the good folks at Knightline Sports Network, I will tell you, go Knights and charge on.